What is there that gives you hope? Where are you seeing solidarity or maybe even a smidgen of positive change?
I have hope in maternity. I think just the women and the families and people that we care for, seeing it is hopeful seeing new life. Like, I think that's always really hopeful. Although sometimes the circumstances are really challenging, really stressful. I think that gives me hope in just in the future.
One thing to keep optimistic about is that when times are tough, like when we were on taking industrial action, another time there was a bit of a wave of industrial action. You know, the teachers were out for a bit, and many other unions. And for me, I remember finding it quite uplifting that even though it was a struggle and people were really kind of up against it, you know, we all stood together, and it was like so many good rallies we had, and it was just uplifting that you know, the old catchphrase, and unity is strength, and when we all stand together, we're much stronger.
Hello, croeso to A Wales That Works for Everyone. My name is Linsey Imms and I work for TUC Cymru, the voice of Wales at work. Our mission is simple: to create a Wales where everyone has a voice through their union and an income that they can build a life on. How is the cost of living crisis impacting the workers who keep Wales running? And what needs to change so that we can create a Wales that does work for everyone? To help us explore these questions, I'm joined by two fantastic young trade unionists, Linsey, who's a newly qualified midwife, and Jason, a train guard.
So my name's Linsey. I am a midwife, but I also do a lot of work with Trade Union Congress in Wales. I started off as a student midwife forum member, so I was a representative of midwives across Wales, student midwives across Wales, and I did quite a bit with them. I went to the Senedd. I had like really good experiences advocating for student midwives in midwifery, and I've continued that now that I'm qualified as a midwife as well.
Brilliant. Jason?
So my union journey started about I think about 12 years ago, when I became the young workers officer for our the Communication Workers Union South East Wales Amal branch. From there, I had a number of roles: branch treasurer, local unit rep, where I went on to become the branch secretary during quite a turbulent time in Royal Mail, where we took 18 days of industrial action. I also was involved in re-establishing the Rhondda Cynon Taf Trades Council, and then I left Royal Mail 2 years ago, but I'm now the chair of the Rhondda RMT branch.
Blimey, busy, both of you. Thank you so much for being here. All right, so let's get into it. When you hear the phrase cost of living crisis, we hear it all the time on the news and stuff, don't we, at the moment? What does it mean to you in your day-to-day life? And what do you think what impacts is it having in the communities that you live in? Jace?
So for me, the cost of living crisis is it kind of captures working people doing the best they can. You know, they're working as hard as they can, but unfortunately, their wages and it's just not keeping up with the costs of trying to live a normal life. Everybody, a lot of industries now are getting told they got to work harder and faster for less, while pay packets are not keeping up with inflation.
Yeah, I understand.
I
Linsey?
agree. I would say for me personally, it means struggling financially, and struggling with the basics kind of at times. And then I think for the people that I care for in work, so the women, the families, the people that I care for, seeing, but this was more particularly when I was on community as a student. Now I'm not in community, I'm in the hospital, but seeing people struggle to decide whether they're going to heat the house so that the baby's warm and that the baby's okay, or choose, I'd say, healthy foods, because ultimately we know that there's lots of foods that are really affordable but aren't the best for us. And it's like people are having to choose between their health and nutrition, or their health and being warm, which I just think is almost Victorian. It's crazy that we're in this position. And I find that really sad. And I don't think the government really are thinking about, okay, there's newborn babies coming into this world that have to be cold, and that will endanger their health and then affect their families as
Yeah,
well.
especially when we've got so many damp houses in Wales, don't we, because of our wonderful climate.
Yeah.
So if I could delve a bit more into that for you, Linsey, in health and maternity services, you touched on it already, but say a bit more about how the cost of living crisis is affecting staff, patients, and the new families that you support.
In terms of staff, I know that our pay packets ultimately it's tighter. It's a lot tighter. You're very much okay. You need to pay your bills. pay for your car, pay for all the essentials. I don't have children myself, but for staff members with children, it's extremely expensive. Nursery fees, things like that. There's a lot that people are paying for, and we are working harder, I would say. I can't compare to before COVID because I wasn't a midwife at that period, but the role of a midwife is a lot more. There's a lot more responsibility. There's a lot more expectations. The climate, the picture of midwifery is changing, so there's a lot more responsibility, and the pay, I feel, doesn't line up with the level of responsibility. Before midwifery, I used to work in marketing, and I would have earned more. And now I've got 2 lives in my hands. Like, sometimes I really think about it, like, I literally have 2 lives in my hands, a lot like the life of the mother or birthing person, and then the life of a baby, and if it's twins, 2 babies. So, like, it is a hefty responsibility, and the amount that we get paid, I don't feel reflects that, based on knowing what other, industries pay, based on working in other industries myself. I just don't feel like it lines up.
And I wonder what mothers would think too, going in to give birth, knowing that staff are struggling to pay their own bills and perhaps don't have.
Yeah.
I'm sure you give 100% concentration every time, but that
Mhm.
must be a challenge for you and your
Mm.
colleagues.
It's
Yeah,
financial stress ultimately.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, across sectors like the postal service and rail, because I know you've worked in one and now work in the other, what impacts have you seen for workers, especially after years of pay restraint and rising bills?
So in Transport for Wales, where I work, I think we have got really good terms and conditions, and obviously, as with everybody else, with the rise in inflation and cost of living crisis, obviously people are still seeing their pay packets stretched. But I always think about my experience in the Communication Workers Union, especially going back to when we were on taking industrial action, where I thought that the union nationally kind of found it difficult to manage the level of industrial action we would take in. So, for example, what I mean is we took quite a lot of like 1 day strikes, or we took a couple of days together,
Mhm.
and there was a big kind of debate going on at the time. So you had some maybe of the older generation just at the time, who may have been in a bit more of a comfortable position, just because I don't know, maybe mortgages are more paid off, etc., where they wanted obviously to take more action.
Mhm.
And then on the other side of the scale, you'd have members who would be calling me up, literally in tears on the phone, because they couldn't afford to take any more industrial action, or they couldn't afford to take 1 day's industrial action.
Mm.
So I think nationally, it was a bit of a struggle how to draw that line between the two disparaging kind of views on how best to tackle that. But yeah, that's something I found really quite surprising is the level of that people were kind of suffering financially, and how just taking 1 day's action was too much. Yeah, that was something which was quite shocking.
That's such an interesting point. I had never thought about that before, but it's about whether or not you can afford to strike.
Yeah.
And nobody strikes because they want to. They strike because they're not getting something that they need. And then to have to think about the financial implications of that and taking a day's strike action where you're not getting paid. Yeah. And as you say, if you're an older worker with no mortgage, it's one thing. But if you're a young parent with children in school and all the rest of it, that's something else, isn't it? Okay. I suppose this leads on from that point then is how have your union supported members through this crisis, through the cost of living crisis? If they have, what's worked and what still needs to happen? What support have you been getting from RCM, for instance?
Well, I can only speak about in my own experience as a student, particularly towards the end of being a student. They were very supportive because in midwifery, in your final year, the course completely runs from September till September. So a lot of students in other disciplines will run from September to about July, and then you've got your summer off, or sometimes even June, I think.
Mm.
We don't have that. We September till September, you're on placement, working for free, working and learning for free, sorry, I might add. And you then, when the course ends, and you start your job, there's a large period of time where student finance, you last got in April. So April to September, you've got to make that money last. You're on placement, so it's really hard to work in addition to that. And then you're starting a new job, which you won't get paid until November. So April to November,
Oosh.
it's a massive amount of time. And I got to a point where, so I was doing placement, and then I also had a part-time job in a nursery. I was getting burnt out because I was working 37 and a half hours a week in placement, where you don't get paid. And then I was doing those nursery shifts on top of it to try and make some money. And I couldn't cope anymore. I just couldn't cope. It was too much. So I kind of took a step back with the nursery work, but then I needed money. The RCM were really, really supportive they guided me on different funds that you can apply for. I didn't even know about some of these funds. And they were really great because I reached out to them. However, my thing is there's a lot of students who were struggling, who aren't as comfortable reaching out for help, or they weren't aware of the help that was available, and they did continue to struggle. And I tried to signpost as much as I could, but I think it's really important for unions to be so visible with things that are available to people, because not everybody reaches out, not everybody is as forthcoming. I think it's really important for them to make it quite obvious so that people can get help when they really need it.
And do you know, I mean, I can't imagine how much difficult that must be trying to do 2 jobs and only getting paid for one of them. But do you know if that causes a lot of dropout within the industry? I would imagine it might.
I would say may not be physical dropout. So there is quite a lot of dropout. We get a lot of people who kind of either leave in the first year or leave in second year for health reasons. I almost left at one point, but I was supported, which was really good. We get a lot of pregnancy, so people will get pregnant, leave for a year and come back to the following year. But I know for a fact, just from course mates, colleagues, and when I was on the RCM, I also met people from different universities, not just my own. The sheer burnout that you get in the early stages, I find that when you then actually start the career after you've been a student, you start burnt out.
Right.
So even if you haven't dropped out because you're like, no, I've got to finish, I've invested so much into this, I've worked so hard.
And it is a vocation, isn't it?
It's a vocation.
People do it because they love the idea of that kind of work. Yeah.
But I do find, we do get dropouts, yes, but I find the most significant thing is people are starting the job burnt out because they have had to financially. I know people that work the 37.5 hours and then did 30 on top to be able to survive. And it's just, you finish the 3 years and you're exhausted before you begin.
Absolutely. I didn't ask you the same question, Jason. How do you think that so from experience of 2 unions, from the CW and RMT, right?
That's right, yeah.
Have you found them being supportive for people who are suffering through the cost of living crisis? Have they got anything that they can offer out to members?
Yeah, so I suppose ultimately unions help through their collective bargaining and hopefully negotiating above inflation pay rises. But again, going back to my experience in the CW, where people were really struggling financially, especially due to obviously the cost of living crisis was massive, and I think we'd had like a 1% pay rise, and people were on their knees, and on top of that, the industrial action. But we had a welfare fund which unions could request and tap into if they were really, really badly struggling. But as well as that, unions provide legal advice and also signpost members to where they can get advice on on debt, etc., and financial support.
Brilliant. So it's all about asking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being part of a union in the first instance and then asking for the help when you need it. Great. Okay. Do you think the crisis has changed how people view unions in your workplaces? Are more people joining, getting active, maybe asking new things of the union?
I would say that I think a lot of people have realised that being in a union is not like a traditional kind of historical thing which people used to do. I think it's a necessity because obviously it's a fact that for industries who are unionised, then you're much more likely to be on better pay and terms and conditions than a different workplace that's not unionised within the same industry. So being in a union pays for itself. Yeah.
Great. Shay?
I would say it's a bit half and half. Just because I know there's a lot of midwives or people that I know personally who have become a little bit disillusioned with the union. There are different, it's not just the Royal College of Midwives, there are the unions that midwives can join. But I think a lot of people feel that what's happening in the hospitals sometimes doesn't translate. The unions aren't as aware, or that we're working really hard and with understaffing and all these problems that have been going on and on and on. They feel that the union isn't doing much for it. I think just from conversations and people leaving unions that they were with for years and changing to another union and things like that. I do think there's an element of not feeling that they're doing as much as they could do.
Okay. Understood. And do you think, I mean, obviously you're both from different backgrounds, you've grew up in different places, we've got male female mix here. Do you think that the cost of living crisis is hitting different groups in different ways? Have you seen
Yeah.
any differences like that?
Massively. I would say I work with 99% women in midwives, obstetricians, men and women. But I work mostly with women. And I do find that women, obviously, we're taking on a lot, especially if we've got families, and not just families as a children, but relatives to care for. We have a big, massive caring responsibility. So I think the fact that we're caring for others means financially we are going to put into those that we're caring for.
Mm,
And men, of course, do the same. But I just think there's like the financial toll and the emotional toll. And then the job itself has its own emotional toll. So yeah, I do think, and then also populations that we look after, people from working class backgrounds and from really, really significantly impoverished backgrounds. I've seen how that finance impacts their health. We know that women who are from um, backgrounds with low socioeconomic status also more likely to have negative health outcomes,
mm.
and more likely to have more interventions and these things. So I do think finance isn't just about money, it's about your entire life and your well-being.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are there experiences that you think are overlooked in public discussion, whether that's pressure on young workers, black workers, older workers, people in essential roles? Do you think that we're missing a trick here? Is there more that we could be doing?
So I think obviously with young workers, I think they're at a massive disadvantage due to the fact that it's more and more difficult to get onto the property ladder now. But I also think maybe the older generation maybe looking at retirement and thinking, well, maybe I need to stay on for a year extra
Mm.
because the cost of living crisis is going to make things more unaffordable, and budgets and pensions are going to be stretched further. But I think in terms of what we could be doing more of, what the unions could be missing, I
Yeah.
think that obviously we have activists in the communities, but I think the unions need to be a bit more of community working as well. It's not all shouldn't be just by the workplace, but to make real change, we need unions out there in the communities more, in my opinion. And that's something which I really think we should be doing more of.
You were nodding away there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I I also feel that unions should really work as much as possible with members from Black, Asian, ethnic backgrounds at this time, especially because things are changing. Things are changing politically, and the climate is getting more volatile.
Mm.
And I think members of colour who are potentially working in areas that could endanger them, or they're public facing, so that you're going to get a whole load of different viewpoints. I think it's really important that the unions kind of I'm not sure what they can do exactly, but I just would like them to say a bit more about supporting those members with potentially experiencing things at work that could be you could have racist incidents at work,
Mm.
and especially if you're in a public facing role. So it's just something to be mindful of.
And if the union is speaking about it, it's more likely to bring forward members who've experienced it and,
Yeah,
get it out in the open, which is only
yeah,
can only help, right?
absolutely.
Okay, going back to your own experiences then, what's the biggest personal adjustment you've had to make to cope with rising costs? And Jason, I suppose for you, it's more of adjustments you've had to make in the past or that you've seen others around you, because I know you're in a better job now, so congratulations on that.
Thanks,
But
congrats.
let's say, if I could ask you first, what your sort of, if you don't mind saying, what your biggest sort of personal change had to be or adjustment.
Um, well, I would say I'm very like cautious about my heating. And I never ever used to be a person like that. I grew up in a house where the heat was always on, like everyone was always cold. And also as a student, my bills were inclusive in my rent
Mm.
and accommodation. So I think I am so like I'm constantly thinking about the heating. It's almost like I can't be calm about it because I'm too scared to get a massive bill and it be a shock to my system, and then that impacts my entire budget for the rest of the month or even the following month. So I think I'm really, really some people may not have to worry about that, but that's something that I worry about. And then I'm also cautious about like spending on food and trying to get like um, offers, and it is a lot of like mental toll in a sense of like always worrying and making sure like, oh, I have to stick to this, or if not. So I can't imagine for people, and I'm fortunate to have a full-time job. There's some midwives that didn't get full-time hours. They only got reduced hours, and that's not what they wanted. They wanted full-time. So I can imagine if that I'm worrying on my full-time, what are people worrying about if they're not um, earning as much as they would have hoped and that they expected to earn?
Yeah. I certainly understand your pain when you talk about the heating. Roll on summer, right?
Yes.
And you're certainly not alone in that. We hear about that up and down the country, don't we? What about you, Jace? Have you?
So for me personally, I just think that be more cautious with any kind of financial decision that I make. But I think Shay made a very, very good point about what we kind of overlooking. Obviously, people are struggling financially, and pay packets, as we already said, are not stretching as far to cover the rising cost of bills, and are making difficult decisions where to turn the heating on or eating. But the toll on the mental health as well was something which we don't really talk about enough. Obviously, there's a big spotlight on mental health, but not really linked to the cost of living crisis. It is more than just not being able to pay a bill, isn't it? Because people are under huge stress, which is having a massive negative impact on people's mental health.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. What's something you wish politicians or the media better understood about how this crisis is affecting ordinary workers? Sometimes we hear politicians talking about how they do actually know the cost of a pint of milk. I think someone's just whispered it in their ear, but we know they don't know as much as perhaps they should. What do you think they're missing in particular?
I think they're missing, and or they don't want to. They don't want to acknowledge that the system is broken. Is that people are working as hard as they can, and they are struggling more and more through no fault of their own. People are working around the clock and taking 2 or 3 jobs. They're doing everything they can, but they're still not making enough money to live comfortably. So for me, I believe the system is broken, and we do need a proper, real living wage.
Shay?
I think what you're saying about the mental health is massive, and I think it's there's a massive focus, yes, on the cost of living crisis, but there is a mental health crisis as well. A lot more people are struggling. That's affecting their mental health, which affects their physical health. We know the continuum between the two. I just think there's not so much of a focus on how struggling financially impacts generations. It's a generational. If your parents have struggled, how that then your upbringing is affected. And how your health is affected. I just think it's not always highlighted as much as it could be.
So if you were First Minister for the day and you got to make a policy change that would affect the cost of living crisis, what do you think you might do?
You
Oh, okay.
go first, please.
Well, I think from the start it should be a real living wage of £15 an hour. Just to help people lift out of poverty. Obviously, you get those like the Conservative Party and others maybe on the right who are more, I suppose, pro business and less pro worker, will be challenging that and saying, well, companies are gonna have to close down and because nobody's gonna be able to afford it. But it's the workers that keep this country connected. It's the workers that make the world go around, if you like. Everybody stood on the doorstep and clapped during COVID for the key essential workers. But after COVID now, clapping doesn't pay the bills. We need proper respect for care workers and postal workers and everybody else who put themselves at immense risk during COVID, and reward them with proper pay, which is going to lift people out of poverty and give people a tidy standard of living. That's all the people want, is just to have a tidy standard of living, so they can bring up their families without knocking the heating off and worrying where the next meal is going to come from.
You'd get my vote. If it helps.
Same here.
What about you, Shay?
I think improving services in general, improving public services. So starting with the NHS, I know it's said all the time, but waiting lists and staffing and how that impacts patient care. No more corridor care. Thankfully, I don't see that in maternity, but I hear about
Babies
it in
don't
the
wait,
news.
right?
Yeah, babies do not wait for anyone. They don't wait for anyone at all. So improving that, and then also improving education. I think they all interlink: education, healthcare, social care. I just think this needs to be a massive improvement, financial investment into the NHS, absolutely, into education systems, into social care. I think there just needs to be a lot more focus on that, and to then help the next generation, because I'd really worry. I have a younger sister who's 10 years younger than me, and I worry what it's going to look like, what the UK is going to look like for her, what healthcare is going to look like, what will she be able to buy a house? Like, these are the things that I think about. So I really hope that's what I would do if I was minister.
Well, again, you'd get my vote.
Thank you.
We need some change, that's for sure. So despite everything, what is there that gives you hope? Where are you seeing solidarity or maybe even a smidgen of positive change?
I have hope in maternity. I think just the women and the families and people that we care for, it's hopeful seeing new life. Like, I think that's always really hopeful. Although sometimes the circumstances are really challenging, really stressful, I think that gives me hope in just in the future. And then I'm so happy that I'm part of the RCM, and I really have had so many wonderful opportunities, and I get hope seeing how things are that they're putting in efforts to change things and improve the working conditions of midwives. So I get hope from there, and I just hope that it continues as well.
What about you, Jace?
For me, I think there's a lot to be kind of pessimistic about, especially when you look across the political spectrum at the moment, and there's so much disillusionment and so many people maybe turning towards the right and reform, and a lot of that has a lot of dangerous ideology. But for me, I suppose one thing to keep optimistic about is that when times are tough, like when we were on taking industrial action, another time there was a bit of a wave of industrial action. The teachers were out for a bit, and many other unions. And for me, I remember finding it quite uplifting that even though it was a struggle and people were really kind of up against it, we all stood together, and it was like so many good rallies we had, and it was just uplifting that this the old catchphrase, unity is strength, and when we all stand together, we're much stronger.
Lovely, lovely sentiment. All right then. So finally, what message would you like to send to workers across Wales who are listening to this podcast?
The message I would give was, make sure if you're not already in a union, make sure you join a union and get active, because we need more and more people to get involved. Unions are not a historical context. It's very current, and we need activism more than ever now.
Great. Lachey?
Mine is a bit more of a chilled one. I would say look after yourself, because life is hard. Working constantly is hard. Trying to pay the bills is hard. But look after yourself and take the moments to care for yourself, especially if you're an activist and someone that's really trying to improve things and trying to make things better. It can get exhausting. It can weigh on you. So I would say to look after yourself, look after your family, and prioritise that, and everything else comes after.
Lovely. Lachey, Jason, thank you so much, Jock and Val Yarn, for joining us today and for speaking so openly about the troubles that you have suffered through and that your colleagues are as well. I've learnt what you guys would do if you were FM for the day. I've learnt what it costs, what it really means to parents and young families who are trying to make a decision between heating and eating. We've talked about the crisis faced by people who want to strike and show solidarity with their union colleagues, but literally can't afford to. I hope it's struck a chord with some people listening as well. But I think the most important thing we've learnt is that being part of a union is always better than not being part of a union. So thank you again. We know that the cost of living crisis won't disappear tomorrow, but there are clear steps that our leaders can take to turn things around. We need a Welsh Government that makes it their mission to make family life affordable. A government committed to making sure that jobs in Wales are secure, fairly paid and unionised. Whether that's in our hospitals and our railways, our industries, our emerging green tech sector, or our creative workforce. And at TUC Cymru, we're not ever going to stop pushing for that change. We'll keep working with unions, with workers and communities to make our case loud and clear, because everyone in Wales deserves an income that they can build a life on, and together we can build a Wales that works for everyone.